The guests are waiting. Stand.
Yes, of course. Let us proceed.
I have a theory about invisibility. It is not about being small. Small people get noticed. Noticed because they are small, because smallness in a palace full of large ambitions draws the eye the way a missing tooth draws the tongue. True invisibility is about being expected and therefore dismissed. The eye finds you, registers Maid, East Wing, nothing remarkable, and moves on before the brain finishes the sentence. I had perfected this. 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days of becoming the human equivalent of a well-placed chair. And then Lord Calder reached for his goblet. It happened between one breath and the next. The goblet tilted. Expensive red wine, the Hartwell vintage, more per bottle than I earn in a month, spread across the corridor stone in a slow, inevitable tide, moving directly toward the Alpha King's boots. I had a cloth in my hand. I was 3 feet away. I moved. Wickstrom Aldrich looked down, not at the wine, not at Lord Calder's mortified face, at me. With those still, amber, paying attention eyes the whole kingdom had learned to read as a single message. I have seen. Nothing escapes me. The eyes found my face, not my uniform, not my cloth, my face. In 3 years, no one with power had looked at my face. And then it arrived. Not the way the old stories promised. No thunder, no celestial announcement, no moonlight splitting the clouds at a convenient angle. It arrived as scent first. Cedar, cold ozone, something underneath both that had no name I knew, reaching past every careful wall I had built and landing somewhere I had specifically closed off for 6 years. My lungs forgot what they were doing. My hand tightened on the cloth until the wine ran between my fingers. Then the pull. Not metaphorical, not the click of recognition I might have managed to dismiss. A physical pull, low in the chest like a thread attached to something vital being drawn taut, and the sudden disorienting awareness of his heartbeat. Not heard, felt, a thrumming that matched my own pulse and then, in 3 seconds, became indistinguishable from it. The mate bond. I had spent 22 years not believing in it. Wickstrom held my gaze for a moment that lasted considerably longer than the situation required. Then he stepped around the wine, nodded once, as though I had done something correct rather than catastrophic, and continued down the hall. His footsteps faded. I stood in the flooded corridor. My hand was still clenched around the wine-soaked cloth. The pull in my chest did not diminish with distance. If anything, it sharpened, a continuous, insistent pressure that my body had apparently decided was its new, permanent condition. I cleaned the wine. I walked back to the East Wing. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed and pressed both hands flat against my knees to stop them from shaking, and told myself with the firmness of someone whose survival depends entirely on being sensible. That was 4 seconds. You are a maid. He is a king. You will not think about this again. My hands shook for another hour. I had spent 3 years making myself into furniture. It took 4 seconds to undo all of it. Let me tell you what the palace looks like from the floor. Not the throne room floor, not the polished obsidian that mirrors back the shoes of people who have never once wondered where their next meal was coming from. The other floors, the ones that matter to no one who matters. The worn stone of the east wing at 5 in the morning, cold enough to bite through the soles of my shoes before the fires were lit. The kitchen passage flagstones, treacherous with water by midday. The back stairs, narrow, unlit, smelling of tallow, connecting the servants' quarters to every room in the keep without once passing through a space that belonged to anyone important. I knew every inch. 3 years had given me the complete, unsentimental map of a place I had never intended to stay in this long. Which step on the third landing creaked and must be avoided? Which corner of the great hall held a draft all year because the mortar behind the hunting tapestry had softened and no one had bothered to fix it? Because no one who mattered ever stood in that corner. The precise hour the head housekeeper completed her morning rounds, and the 12-minute window afterward when the east corridor was entirely, perfectly empty. My hands knew things too. The weight of full water pails carried up 3 flights, the particular resistance of a hearth that had gone cold overnight and needed coaxing back, the roughened palms and red knuckles that no amount of winter salve fully addressed, because the work that caused them did not stop long enough to let them heal. I was not bitter about this. I want to be clear on that. Bitterness requires belief that things ought to have gone differently, and I had abandoned ought a long time ago. My father's illness had taken everything. The house, the savings, the small dignities of a family that had been neither wealthy nor destitute until it suddenly was. The creditor had taken the rest. The debt I inherited at 16 was not enormous by the standards of people who measured such things. By the standards of a 16-year-old girl with no family and no prospects, it was the entire world. 6 years of paying it had reduced it to something almost manageable. 3 more, perhaps 4 if the winter service fees held, and it would be gone. I held that number the way you hold a candle in a long corridor, not because it is much, because it is something to walk toward. I had made peace with smallness. Smallness had kept me fed and housed and, most critically, unbothered. I had very clear, very good reasons for preferring to be unbothered. I first properly looked at Wickstrom on a Wednesday morning in my first autumn at Ashenvale Keep. He was crossing the south courtyard at the head of a council procession, and something about the way the procession moved stopped my cloth mid-circle on the window I was cleaning. Not the way power usually stopped things, loudly, with the performance of importance, with robes and guards arranged to communicate significance. He simply moved, and the procession arranged itself around him without being asked, the way water arranges itself around a stone. He was thinking, privately, specifically, with the focused quality of a man who thinks about things of real consequence, and the thinking belonged entirely to him, conducted in the middle of a crowded courtyard without a single concession to the audience around him. He did not perform. That was what I noted, filed, contained. He is the kind of man, I told myself, with the precise, detached tone I applied to observations I did not intend to act on, that you only safely admire from a significant distance. I filed it in the part of my mind reserved for true and useless things. It stayed there for 2 years and 7 months. I saw Eleanor that same autumn. Queen Dowager Eleanor Aldrich descended the main stair in deep gray silk with the unhurried certainty of a woman who has never once in her life needed to announce her own presence. The staff stepped aside without instruction. I was half a second late in stepping and received Mistress Halvard's elbow in my ribs of consequence. Eleanor paused at the foot of the stairs. She asked about the housekeeper's sister. by name, by the specific nature of the illness, by the recommended healer. She listened with the focused, genuine interest of someone who asked because she actually wanted to know. When Halvard offered the customary reassurance that such things needn't trouble important people, Eleanor said simply, "Nonsense. She is your family. Family is not a concern that can be set aside." She meant it. That was what struck me, watching from my correctly maintained distance. The warmth was real. The care was genuine. I filed Eleanor beside her son. True, irrelevant, to be admired only from a significant distance. I descended the back stairs. I did not think about amber eyes or cedar and cold ozone, or the particular way certain people occupied rooms without ever needing to claim them. I thought of none of it. 3 days later, Lord Calder reached for his goblet.
I will tell you exactly what I told myself in the days following the corridor. On the first day, the Alpha King observes everything. It is his function. The look meant nothing beyond the natural attention of a man identifying a disruption. I believed this with conviction. On the second day, the mate bond is a story. Old women tell it to young girls who want to believe the universe arranged something specifically for them. You are 22 years old and pragmatic, and you have not believed that story since you were 10. I believed this considerably less. On the third day, I stopped telling myself things entirely because I was too occupied engineering my morning route to avoid the East Passage between 8 and 10, which required knowing Wickstrom's schedule, which required asking Petra in the household office carefully innocent questions, which required inventing plausible reasons for needing to know, which was not, I recognized with cold, private disgust, the behavior of someone for whom the corridor incident had meant nothing. I was losing the battle, and narrating my loss with the dry, horrified honesty of someone watching themselves do something they cannot stop. He began appearing in the East Wing, not obviously. He had reasons every time: documents for the archive, a word with the household steward, a letter for the East Gate, all legitimate, all coinciding with an accuracy that could not be accidental with the hours I was reliably in that wing. He never addressed me directly. He didn't need to. The pull, the low, persistent, chest-deep pull that I had stopped pretending I couldn't feel, registered his presence the moment he crossed the threshold. Not sound, not sight, something underneath both, the way you feel a storm in your bones before the sky commits to showing it. On the fourth day of this, I was carrying a full water pail up the east stairs when I felt him enter the wing below. The pail swung. Water sloshed over the edge onto my already roughened hands. I gripped the handle so hard the knuckles went white and stood completely still on the third step, jaw tight, waiting for the sensation to locate itself at a manageable distance. It did not locate itself at a manageable distance. He was closer today than he had been yesterday, and my body, which had apparently stopped consulting me before making decisions, registered this as significant. I stood on the third step with water running down my wrist and cold stone under my feet, and something blazing in my chest that I had no legitimate name for, and I breathed until my knuckles unclenched. Then I carried the pail upstairs, emptied it, came back down, and did not once look toward the corridor where I could feel him thinking about something in that private, specific, paying attention way. I was not made of stone, but I was, at this point, trying very hard. The library incident happened on a Thursday evening. A falling candelabra. 6 candles tilting toward a stack of council documents in the particular slow arc of something that had already decided to fall. 30 seconds, perhaps less.
I went in. What followed was not graceful. I caught the candelabra with both hands, prevented it from falling, failed to prevent one candle from catching the corner of the nearest document, smothered that with the cloth I was carrying, knocked the stand into the shelf behind me with my elbow, and ended standing in the middle of the library with ash-blackened hands and a hem that was not going to recover, in a cloud of dispersing smoke. The documents were intact. The library was not on fire. The door opened. I did not need to turn. The pull arrived before the sound. Wickstraw stood in the doorway. He took a complete, unhurried inventory. Smoke, broken stand, ruined hem, my ash-smudged hands. His expression did not change visibly, but something behind it did. "Thank you," he said. Not "well done," not "you may go," not the formal acknowledgement of a king to a function that had performed itself. Thank you. 2 words addressed to a person rather than a role, like I had done him something individual and specific, and he owed me the acknowledgement of it as such. Are you hurt? 3 years of service, 10,000 small incidents involving fire and falling objects, and the carelessness of people with more important things to consider than the consequences of that carelessness to the staff. Not once had anyone asked me that. Something moved in my chest that was completely separate from the pull of the bond, older, more private, more dangerous. The specific ache of a kindness arriving somewhere that had been braced against kindness for a very long time. I pressed my ash-smudged hand against my skirt before it could find my sternum. "No," I said. "Your Majesty." He stood at the reading table with his hands resting on the documents, looking at the broken candle stand with the expression of a man considering something that had needed considering for a long time. "Iris," he said. Just my name, nothing attached to it, like he had been carrying it and was now setting it down carefully in a specific place. The pull blazed so completely that I looked at the floor and breathed through it and told myself it was the smoke still dispersing in the air. It was not the smoke. He left. I stood in the library until my hands stopped shaking, which took longer than I would have liked to admit, and then I made myself walk back to the East Wing at the normal pace of a maid who had not just experienced anything requiring recovery time. That same evening, passing the private dining room, I heard it. Wick. Eleanor's voice, that particular tone, not soft, not performative, but specific, the possessive specificity of a name that belongs entirely to one person. I heard him answer with the full devoted attention of a man who has never once in his life been too occupied for his mother. I heard her describe a border dispute. I heard him ask 3 questions that showed he had already been thinking about it. I heard her real laugh, unguarded and warm, and "you were already planning this," and his quiet, "I was waiting to hear your read on the Eastern Lord." The ease between them was a living thing, complete and old, built over 15 years of a woman pouring herself entirely into the shape of her son's future. I stood in the corridor and pressed my back against the cold stone wall and understood, with terrible clarity, exactly what I was standing outside of, and what I could never, under any circumstances, be permitted to threaten. I was still standing there when I heard Mistress Halvard's voice from the far end of the passage, low, urgent, the tone reserved for situations requiring immediate containment. "The Queen Dowager is asking," she said, "which girl was in the East Corridor this evening?" The cold of the stone moved through my back and spread through my entire body. She already knew. Pearl found me at the end of the east corridor just after midday, and I knew immediately that something was wrong. Not because of the words, "His Majesty requires your presence in the throne room," but because Pearl was 15 years old and constitutionally incapable of hiding what she felt. And what her face was doing beneath the careful delivery was the expression of someone carrying something much heavier than a summons. "Pearl," I said. "The whole council is there," she whispered. Then she pressed her lips together like she'd said too much. I was holding a candle I'd been using to check a sconset. I thought about putting it down. I kept it. Some part of my mind had already begun calculating and understood I was going to need something to hold. The throne room at full council assembly was a space I had entered before only as furniture. I knew its floors. I had polished its sconset. I swept its stone at 5 in the morning when it belonged to no one. I had never stood in it while 24 pairs of eyes turned to find me in the doorway. They all turned, simultaneously, the specific collective attention of a room that had been waiting to see what walked through the door. Eleanor was seated to Wickstrom's right in the formal chair, straight-backed, hands still, the containing posture of a woman trained to hold enormous things without spilling any of them. Her face, when it found me, was the council face, the face that revealed nothing. Wickstrom stood, formal, precise, the posture of a man who had chosen every word in advance and intended to mean all of them. He said, "The mate bond." He said, "His chosen Luna." He said, "My name."
The room did not erupt. That was the first thing I registered through the shock. No eruption. Instead, complete, total, profound silence. The specific silence of a space where 24 people have stopped breathing simultaneously because the air has been rearranged into something none of them were prepared for. My candle was warm in my hand. The stone was cold through my shoes. I had not eaten since morning, and the light through the north window was late autumn amber, 3 hours before dark. I noted all of this with the cartographic part of my mind that kept working regardless of what the world was doing to the rest of me. And then I looked at Eleanor. Her face went still. Not the controlled stillness of a woman managing herself, the absolute total stillness of a very controlled face encountering something it had not been built to receive. And in that stillness, before the control reasserted, everything was visible. The shock, the disbelief, and beneath both, moving like cold, deep water beneath thin ice, the expression of a woman who has spent 15 years building a house and has just watched something walk uninvited through the wall. Her eyes found mine. She looked at me the way she looked at everything, completely, nothing missed, the full measure taken in a single glance. Then she looked at her son. "She is nothing," Eleanor said. Not to me. The distinction was precise and deliberate, and I understood it instantly. Addressing me would have granted me a significance she had not yet conceded. She was speaking only to Wickstrom. "She carries linen. She does not know what this crown requires, and you are asking her to carry it." The silence that followed was a different kind, not suspended breath, suspended verdict. I watched Wickstrom's jaw tighten. It was the first time I had seen something crack the composure, brief, controlled, but real. Something that lived beneath his quiet, something that had been waiting for precisely this moment and was now pressing against the inside of his restraint.
I am not asking her to carry it alone, he said. The council adjourned without resolution. I walked back to the east wing with the candle still in my hand. I sat on my bed. I stared at the flame. Everything had changed. I didn't know yet whether I was going to let it. Then came 3 quiet, measured knocks at my door. Eleanor's knock. I knew it without having heard it before, the way you know certain things without being taught. I did not move. I did not breathe. The knock came again. I opened the door. Eleanor stood alone in the corridor. No attendant, no architecture of importance, just a woman in grey silk, with her hands folded and her spine perfectly straight, looking at me with the patient certainty of someone who had already decided how the next hour would go. "May I come in?" she said. It was not a question. I stepped back. She entered my room, my 22 square feet, my straw mattress, the ribbon from my mother's things folded at the bottom of my trunk, and sat in the only other chair as though she had been sitting in rooms like this her entire life. She looked at me and waited until I sat. "I know your name," she said. "I know your history. I know what you are owed and what you have paid, and how long you have been paying it." A pause. "I am not your enemy, Iris. I want you to understand that before I say what I have come to say." She told me about the 15 years, not with drama, not requiring sympathy, the way Wickstrom told things, straight as fact. The men at the border and the men at the council table who had seen a widow and a boy as an opportunity, the alliances brokered in rooms that did not want her present, the decisions made at the cost of her own comfort and sleep and grief, because grief was a luxury a woman protecting a 12-year-old king could not afford to display. "I built something," she said, "not for myself, for him, so that no one could ever look at my son and see an opening." She looked at her hands, then at me. "He gives himself entirely to whatever he loves. It is the best thing about him." A pause, carrying the full weight of 15 years. "It is also the thing that could destroy everything I have built. He does not calculate the remainder, Iris. He never has." Her eyes held mine without mercy and without malice. "I am asking you, as a woman who appears to me to be genuinely sensible, whether you are willing to be the remainder." She stood, smoothed her skirt once with the efficient gesture of a woman returning to the work waiting for her elsewhere. At the threshold she stopped. "The Westmere estate is a good household. The terms are considerably better than your current contract. Your debt would be cleared entirely." A pause. "Mistress Halvard has the documentation ready whenever you choose to sign." Then she was gone. I sat for a long time. The most devastating thing about Eleanor's argument was not that it was cruel, it was that it was not. Every word was true. The 15 years were real. The cost was real. The remainder was real. I pressed both hands flat on the table. I will tell you what I did not do. I did not cry. I had learned very young that crying required a belief that someone would eventually come, and the belief had not, historically, been rewarded. But something happened in my chest that was adjacent to crying, a slow, sustained pressure, the specific pain of someone who has spent their entire life agreeing with a verdict and has just been handed the most impeccable version of that verdict they have ever encountered. She was right. She was entirely, precisely, unassailably right. And the voice that whispered, "She is right. You were never the right material. The cost is too high." That voice was not new. Eleanor had not introduced it. She had simply walked through a door I had been leaving open since I was 16 years old. My hands were still pressed flat on the table. I made myself lift them, made myself stand, made myself light the candle for the evening with steady fingers. I was still shaking, slightly, where no one could see it. Then Pearl appeared in my doorway, breathless. "An Eastern lord is arriving tomorrow," she whispered. "He is bringing his daughter. They are saying she has already been prepared. For consideration," she swallowed, "as Luna." The candle flame held steady. Eleanor had not waited to see if I would sign the Westmere documents. She had already moved to the next piece. He came back on a Tuesday. The mate bond announced his return the moment he passed through the outer gate, that bell that rang specifically for me, that I had stopped pretending I couldn't hear weeks ago. I was in the kitchen garden cutting late autumn herbs because the cold was clarifying and my head needed clarifying badly. I had seen the Eastern Lord's daughter the previous evening. I had not meant to. She had been crossing the south courtyard with Eleanor, tall, composed, the kind of beauty that looked cultivated specifically for throne rooms, and Eleanor had been speaking to her with the particular attentive warmth I recognized as Eleanor at her most deliberate. The daughter had laughed at something, and the laugh had been perfectly calibrated, warm without being familiar, confident without overreach. I had watched from the window I was polishing and pressed the cloth against the glass so hard my knuckles ached. I cut the rosemary now with more force than the rosemary required. The stems bruise if you cut them angry. I turned. Wickstrom stood at the garden entrance in plain, dark wool, travel-worn, something slightly loosened about him that the formal version never showed. He looked at the rosemary, then at me. "I wasn't angry," I said. "No," he agreed without conviction. He sat on the low wall at a respectful distance, not beside me, not yet, with the particular ease of a man who had learned that proximity to me required patience and had decided, somewhere over the past weeks, to simply have it in unlimited supply. We talked about the garden, which plants held through cold, which ones didn't. The stubborn rosemary in the corner, gnarled and improbably alive after 3 harsh winters. "Things that decide they belong," Wickstrom said, looking at it, "are difficult to move." He was not looking at the rosemary. "She is very accomplished," I said. "The Eastern Lord's daughter." "Yes." "Your mother chose well." "My mother always chooses well." A pause. "That is not the same as choosing right." He turned and looked at me with the full, direct, amber attention and told me about the girl at 17. He told it without drama, as fact. His mother had seen what the alliance would cost the northern border. She had been right. He had released the girl without explanation and carried the grief quietly for 2 years, telling no one. "Do you regret it?" "I regret she didn't know why." His hands rested still on the wall. The choice was right. My mother saw it clearly before I did. I looked at the rosemary. "And now?" The garden was very quiet. "Now I am 31 years old." His voice was the same quiet it always was, but something beneath it had changed, settled into a register I had not heard from him before. The specific tone of a man who has thought about something completely and arrived at the far side of it. "I see clearly, and what I see, I am not releasing." The mate bond blazed so completely and so suddenly that I gripped the edge of the stone wall with both hands, not gracefully, not with composure, but with the urgent grip of someone who needs something solid because the ground has just moved. The pull was not subtle this time. It was a physical thing. heat moving through my chest and down my arms, my pulse spiking in a way I felt at my throat and my wrists and behind my eyes. I pressed my palm flat against the cold stone and breathed. The stone was cold. I told myself that was why I was pressing my hand against it. It was not why.
He left without pressing me for an answer I wasn't ready to give. That was the thing about Wickstrom. He understood that patience was not the same as distance. I sat in the kitchen garden for a long time after his footsteps faded, hand still against the stone, thinking about Eleanor, not as enemy, not as obstacle, but as a woman who loved her son so completely she had ceased to be able to see where her love ended and his life began. A woman who had built something real and was protecting it the only way she knew. And I began to think, carefully, for the first time, without dismissing it, about whether I was the kind of person who stayed. I had never been that person. Every place I had ever been had been temporary by design. Temporary was safe. Temporary meant you controlled the leaving. What Wickstrom was asking, what the bond was asking, what the warmth in my chest that I kept pressing my hand over was asking, was not temporary. I was still sitting with this when Pearl came running across the kitchen yard. "The formal presentation is tomorrow," she said, gripping my arm. "The Eastern Lord's daughter to the full court." Her voice dropped. "Iris, they're saying it's already decided." The cold of the stone under my palm went through my hand and settled in my chest. Tomorrow. The article arrived on a Wednesday morning. I read it 3 times. It was perfectly written. Not a punishment, a transition, a transfer of my service contract to the Westmere estate, effective at my earliest convenience, accompanied by a full settlement of my remaining debt. Every penny cleared. The thing I had organized my entire existence around carrying for 6 years, erased in 3 paragraphs by a woman who wanted me gone badly enough to purchase my absence. I sat on the edge of my bed and held it, and felt the specific quality of a trap constructed with genuine kindness. She had cleared my debt. I could leave today. Everything I had told myself I wanted for 6 years, handed to me in 3 paragraphs, in exchange for simply disappearing. I sat with it for a full day. I thought about my father, the illness, the debt, 16 years of paying it, the weight that had shaped me the way water shapes stone, slowly, completely, until I could no longer remember the shape I had been before it. I thought about the east wing at 5 in the morning, the back stairs, 3 years of folded linen and roughened hands, and the careful, exhausting work of becoming furniture. I thought about Wickstrom in the garden, his hands still on the wall. What I see, I am not releasing. I thought about the pull in my chest that I kept pressing my hand over, that blazed every time he was near, and ached like something missing every time he was not. And then I thought about Eleanor sitting across my small table with her 15 years and her impeccable argument and her genuine care. And I saw it. Eleanor had not introduced the voice that said, "You are not enough, you are the wrong material, you will fall." That voice had been mine since I was 16 years old.
It had been mine before Eleanor existed in my world. Eleanor had not built the wound. Eleanor had walked through a door I had been leaving open my entire life. I had been agreeing with Eleanor for 22 years. I had simply never met her until now. I folded the document, put it in my pocket, stood, walked out of the East Wing.
The council chamber held Wickstrom at the head of the table, Eleanor to his right, 4 council members along the sides with the careful expressions of men waiting to see what shape the next hour took. Every pair of eyes found me in the doorway. I crossed the room. I did not perform. I did not build an argument. I stood and spoke in the voice I used at 5 in the morning when the palace belonged to no one and there was nothing to perform for. I know what I am, I said. I know what I am not. I know what this position requires, and I know I have not been trained for it. I looked at Eleanor directly, for the first time without managing the look. I know that you love your son more than I have ever seen anyone loved. I know what you have built, and I am not dismissing it, not one stone of it. A breath. But I am not nothing. I have never been nothing, and I will not walk away from the first true thing that has ever found me because it arrived in the wrong dress. The chamber was absolutely still. Eleanor looked at me with the full, complete, nothing-missed attention she gave to everything that mattered. Then she looked at Wickstrom. His face was open in a way I had never seen it, unguarded, warm, the expression of a man who has been holding something tightly for a very long time and has just been told he can put it down. Something moved through Eleanor's expression. Not agreement, not surrender, the specific quality of someone encountering something they did not predict and are recalibrating to account for. The silence stretched. "Sit down, child," Eleanor said. "If you are going to be Luna of this pack, the first thing I will teach you is that you never stand in council when there is a chair available." I sat. The debt document was still in my pocket. The council members were carefully not looking at each other, and as Eleanor gathered her papers with the efficient precision of a woman returning to work, she paused beside my chair and said, quietly enough that only I could hear, "The Eastern Lord's daughter returns home tomorrow. I made her a generous offer for her trouble." A pause. "I expect the same standard from you, Iris. Do not make me regret beginning to invest in you." She left, and I understood, sitting in that chair, that Eleanor had not been outmaneuvered. Eleanor had been watching me walk in, watching me speak, watching her son's face. She had made a new calculation. She was not surrendering. She was acquiring, and I had just agreed to 7 in the morning.
7 in the morning arrived before I was ready for it. Eleanor's chambers were a working room, documents in precise stacks, territorial maps with careful annotations, the organized density of a mind that never fully stopped. She was already seated when I arrived, a document open before her that she wasn't reading. She was waiting. "Sit," she said, and pushed the first document across the table. "Pack Law, Chapter 1. You will read it today. Tomorrow I will ask you questions and you will answer correctly, or we will repeat the process until you do. No warmth, no cruelty. The complete, efficient expectation of a woman who did not consider the distinction relevant to the work at hand." I read. The following morning she asked questions. I answered most correctly. The ones I had wrong she corrected with the precision of someone who considers error a problem requiring solution, rather than a character flaw requiring commentary. The weeks accumulated. Pack law became territorial history, became council protocol. She corrected without cruelty and without gentleness. She asked difficult questions and waited, genuinely waited without filling the silence, for complete answers. She is teaching me, I noted privately, the way you teach something you are not yet sure you want, but have decided to invest in regardless. The public test came on a gray Thursday in the second month. A council session. Routine, Eleanor had said. A minor territorial dispute. I was to observe from the side chair, take notes, say nothing. The territorial lord arrived with his delegation and looked at me, at my East Wing hands with their roughened knuckles, at the dress that fit correctly but carried no family crest, with the particular expression of a man who has just noticed something in the wrong room. I was not aware, he said to the council, pleasantly, that the king had taken to bringing domestic staff to formal sessions. The room went quiet. The 4 council members looked carefully at their documents. Wickstrom's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did. The jaw tension I had seen once before in the throne room, pressing against the inside of his restraint. He opened his mouth. Eleanor spoke first. "Lord Fenwick," she said, with the pleasant tone she reserved for people who had made a miscalculation. "The woman beside me is Iris Aldrich, your future Luna. I suggest you revise the opening of whatever you intended to say next." The Lord revised it, considerably. I looked at my notepad and wrote nothing, and breathed very carefully through the heat rising in my face. Not shame, I realized, surprised. Not the old familiar shrinking. Something else. Something that felt almost like fury. Almost like the desire to occupy my chair more completely rather than less. Afterward, in the corridor, Eleanor fell into step beside me without comment. "You kept your composure," she said. I almost didn't. A pause. "Almost," she said, "is sufficient for now." It was not approval, but it was the shape of it viewed from a distance. 3 months in, on a gray winter morning, I annotated a border document correctly, caught the specific implication in the Eastern Lord's phrasing that suggested a request being framed as a courtesy, flagged it in the margin, handed it back. Eleanor read the annotation, did not look up, made the small sound, low, single, that I had learned through 3 months of close attention meant correct. "You have a good eye for what matters," she said. She turned the page. I turned my own page. I understood that this was as close to "well done" as Eleanor had ever come with anyone who was not her son. I said nothing. I did not need to. The first snow arrived on a Thursday. I stood at the window of the room that was now properly mine and watched it fall over the inner courtyard and thought about a girl who had arrived at this palace 6 years into a debt she hadn't chosen and made herself into furniture and called it survival. Pearl helped me dress. Deep winter blue, not the gold of court ceremony, nothing that could be mistaken for performance. The blue of 5 in the morning, the hour the palace belonged to no one, and I had moved through it like smoke, owing nothing to anybody. My mother's ribbon, worn soft with years of being the one thing I had kept through everything, woven carefully into my braided hair. "You look," Pearl said, stepping back, "like someone who has decided something." "I decided it months ago," I said. "I just needed to catch up with myself." She squeezed my hand once, hard, and let go. The courtyard held the whole pack. I had not expected the whole pack. I had prepared for council and formal assembly and the contained ceremony of institutional acknowledgement. What I found at the entrance was every person Ashenvale Keep contained who could make the journey, common and noble, guard and staff, gathered in the falling snow with torches blazing orange against the white air. They turned when I appeared, not ceremony, the genuine collective turning of people towards something they had been waiting for. Wickstrom waited at the altar in formal black. He looked up the moment I appeared at the entrance, not at the crowd, not at the torches, not at the assembled pack he was responsible for, at me, with the still, amber, paying attention eyes. And he held my gaze all the way across the courtyard, all the way to the front. The mate bond was quiet for the first time since the corridor. Not absent, present everywhere. Warmth rather than urgency. The specific quality of something that has finally arrived where it was going and no longer needs to pull. Eleanor stood as witness. I had spent 3 months learning to read her face with the precision I had once applied to corridor drafts and creaking stairs. The council face was present, the face she wore when she was holding a great deal and had decided how much to show. But in it, in the specific arrangement of her eyes when they found mine across the courtyard, I saw something that had not been there the day of the throne room announcement. Not pride, not yet, the country that bordered it. The vows were short. I had refused elaborate language because elaborate language had never once in my life been honest, and I was finished with anything that was not honest. I vow to see this pack as it is, not as it is presented to me, to stand beside you, not behind you, not in front of you, in every room that matters, for every year that follows this one. A breath. And to never again apologize for taking up space in a room I have been asked to enter. Wickstrom looked at me the way he always looked at me, directly, specifically, without performance, and spoke in the plain voice of a man who meant every syllable. I vow to be worth looking at directly, to be the kind of king the woman beside me does not have to make herself small for, to ensure that every person in this pack who carries something real is never asked to hide it. A pause, and something shifted in his expression, warm and quietly, privately delighted, and to ensure that whatever spills in the east corridor is never wine worth mourning. The sound that moved through the gathered pack was half laughter, half the specific warmth of people recognizing something real. I laughed, the real version, surprised and helpless and entirely mine. Wickstrom went still the way he always went still when I laughed, as though memorizing it so he could find it again. Lord Emmet, with great dignity, pronounced us joined. The snow fell softly on the bonded Luna of Ashenvale Keep. 1 year later. The great hall holds a winter feast. I sit at the high table in deep blue silk, Wickstrom beside me, Eleanor to my right with a council document, because Eleanor does not consider feasts an excuse to stop working. She passes it sideways without comment. I read it, annotate 2 lines. The Eastern delegation's phrasing in paragraph 3 carries the same courtesy framing I flagged in my 3rd week of sessions, and someone should note it, and pass it back. Eleanor reads the annotations, makes the small sound that means correct, does not look up, turns the page. Wickstrom notices the exchange, says nothing, reaches for his goblet with the expression I have learned belongs specifically to the moments when he is quietly, privately satisfied with the state of everything. I look toward the servants' passage. A girl, sitting at the long side table near the kitchen entrance, eating alone, head down, doing the careful, practiced work of being unremarkable, the specific posture of someone who has learned to occupy the minimal possible space and called it safety. I know that posture. I wore it for 3 years. I wore some version of it for 22 years before that. I excuse myself from the high table. I cross the hall with no ceremony, no announcement, no attendant, no architecture of importance, and sit down beside her. She looks up with the startled expression of someone who is trained to understand that important people do not visit unimportant places. "What's your name?" I ask. Sable. The careful self-correction of someone remembering just Sable. Good. I look at her plate. The bread here is excellent. The cook uses honey in the crust. Most people don't notice, but it matters. I say it plainly, specifically, as though the detail is worth naming because it is. Are you treated well here? Yes, she says, then something loosening in her face. Yes. If that ever changes, I say, you come to me, not to my position, to me. Do you understand? She nods. She understands. I stay until she finishes her bread. I returned to the high table, take my seat, look out over the hall, the torches blazing, the pack gathered, the life built from a flooded corridor and a spilled goblet, and a document I folded and put in my pocket instead of signing. Eleanor glanced sideways. The Northern Lords delegation arrives Thursday. You will sit in the first session. Not a question. Yes, I say. Wickstrom's hand finds mine beneath the cloth. Quiet, specific. The gesture of a man who stopped looking through me a long time ago and has not once, from that corridor to this moment, looked away. I had spent 3 years making myself into furniture. I had spent 22 years before that making peace with smallness, with the careful, exhausting work of needing nothing and wanting less and calling it wisdom. I had been wrong about what rooms were for. I had been wrong about what looking meant. I had been wrong, most of all, about who I was when no one important was watching, because it turned out I had always been someone worth watching. I was simply the last one to know it. At the far end of the table, Eleanor turned a page, and the corners of her mouth moved in something that was not quite a smile, but was, unmistakably, the country that bordered one. It was enough. For now, it was enough. In the servants' passage, Sable finished her bread. She sat a little straighter than she had been sitting before. It was a small thing. It was, as it turned out, exactly enough to begin.